Hi, my name is Zachary Angelat, and I wanted to go over Go's for range loop. I've created a function here. I should probably change this to for range, and I'm going to change up here just so that when we call it, we don't have to worry about it. So in order to do a for range loop, it's sort of like a for loop, but a for loop you tend to sort of just set the index and it just cycles through. With a for range loop, it tends to just kind of say range through all the values of this thing. And so this thing will do b equals, this is a range loop. And in order to start off the range loop, we do the same thing, add for, and then this is where we set up the value and the index. So you would do the index first, it could be whatever you want to call it, and then whatever value is going to be thrown into the variable as you're ranging through it. So we'll do v, and then you want to do colon equals in order to initialize both. So what this is setting up two variables and initializing two variables, and one's going to be the index, one's going to be the value. And so after this we do range, and whatever it is you're going to range to, which in this case is going to be b, and we set the curlies in order to say what the next operation is going to be. And so as we're ranging through this, we want to be able to print out, let's say, the index and the value. We're just going to do that, but we have to return a string because that's what we have set up here, and we're going to return worked. So this is being called, we have the string, we're ranging through b and throwing its values into here and its index. So when we go to run it, if I can print, oh, I missed the T. So then when we go to print it, it prints out all the values. But the thing is, we printed out the bytes, and these are the bytes of each character. So what we need to do is turn into some kind of string, because it's again ranging through it. So we do this and we print it. There's the characters. I added it in there on purpose so that you get the idea of bytes and strings. They are two totally different things, yet bytes can make up strings and bytes can be converted into strings. So that's just a concept that needs to be understood. If you want to, as you range through it, return a string, you would just use this value and turn this if you wanted to, and we could see what happens. And you notice it just sent t, which is the first character, because when you add the return, it stops the function. You've returned the value, been successful. Now again, kind of like my last video, we can basically take that apart. If you're looking for a specific character, if, and let's say this value is equal to whatever letter you're looking for, I, and then we do the curlies in order to do some operation, and we do return, oh, I forgot this, and we do that value, whatever it's on at the time when it's ranging through. It should return that letter if it's true. Oh yeah, because we already got this, and so it basically said this didn't work, so we'll just move on to the next statement. So we'll run it, and there you go. We returned all these letters, or we printed all these letters up here, but that last one we wanted to return, we got it. It got well, it got returned, I should say, up here. This just basically never made it because of this return. And so that I was returned back from this function that gets stored into this variable that gets printed out here. Seems a little complicated, but really you're just cycling through the letters of a string. And I think with the difference between the for loop and the range loop, the range is basically saying how many values are inside of it go through. If you're using a for loop where you can specify, where you have to specify some kind of end value that it's indexing through, you may only want part of whatever that value is. Another thing that I think I forgot in the last video to explain sort of was the scoping. And so with a for loop and a range loop, any values that are initialized within that range loop stay within that for a range loop. And so if I were to do, let's say, well, since this is equal, you're still, well, we'll see. If I were to do something like that, undefined. And that's because whatever values are initialized have to stay within this. So in order to get around this, you can do a return inside of that range loop, or you can specify it up here for I, let's say, or no, index for I, and var string, v string. And then you would take away this colon. And so when you go to print it out, now it says rune. So if we change this to rune, what would happen? Return cannot assign type rune to v because we specified it as a string. But you get the idea that when it comes to types with Go, you really have to understand kind of what's going on and how it's breaking down strings or whatever data structure you're doing. And so it's important to know these different types. So if we're doing this and we're set it to rune, and let's see, so you cannot use a string on type as rune return argument. So actually that shouldn't have been, should be a string because that's what we're returning. We'd have to also do this as well to make sure we're returning a string. And so it returned the strings and it found I still, but there's a lot of subtlety there that I think a lot of people might get frustrated on, and it's the idea that this is a rune while it's ranging through it. So if you were to, let's say, just return the rune itself as a rune, because you notice there was a difference between the for loop and the range loop when you're dealing with strings. So let's say we're gonna try and run this. You notice you get these characters, and I guess those are of the type rune, and I guess they're representations of characters. You can dig more into runes sorta in the documentation, but just know when you're using a for loop, you tend to get bytes. When you're using a range loop, you get runes, and that's a difference. So there's little subtleties that need to be kind of understood while you're using these different operations. But just also keep in mind when you're trying to complete your goal that whatever happens inside the for loop or the range loop stays within it, unless you make it the variable scoped outside of it or you're returning inside of it. It's a big distinction, because you may want to loop through something, but you may want to manipulate some value because you're getting strings of URLs, but you don't want HTTPS or something like that, and you're trying to slice it off or do whatever, but you have to range through them all, but you have to carry that value forward, right? Well, you have to set it up in a certain way so that it does. Why is there so many rules? Well, it's so that when people read your code, and let's say things are, really complicated in it, for whatever reason, you're really complicating whatever code is going on. Let's say you're doing, there's just a bunch of stuff going on. You're like, what is going on with this function? It's so that you can infer, because it works, that you're returning a string of some sort, and that whatever's in here is basically going to stay in here unless it's stated up above. And so it's so that when you look at really complicated code, you can presume things as someone who develops code, instead of, because if you're looking at other people's code that's really complicated, all you can do sort of is make assumptions unless you test it. And so this makes it a lot easier to presume certain things. And so having it all written out, having this sort of presumption code kind of forced on whomever wrote it, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, you're then able to infer things just by looking at it, so you don't have to test every single part of that function to understand what they did. It's a big improvement, and once you write that code, it will be read forever on, and those people will have to forever on spend time to figure out what you did. This cuts a lot of that out. And so it's not so much initially what's most important or easiest or quickest or most productive or whatever, but this allows you to work with that. Thank you.